Thank you very much. My name is John. I'm an alcoholic. That's something you don't read in my CV. And there's a reason for that, because it's a phrase that means different things to different people. It depends on the room you're in. It's also a phrase that, it's a phrase I used first 25 years ago, and for a couple of years had some difficulty with it, and then found that far from being a problem, it was actually a blessing, that it actually clarified a whole lot of stuff for me. But it is a big problem because immediately the culture isolates somebody who calls themselves such, and they decide that's the problem. We have disposed of a problem, we have pathologized it, it isn't our problem, it's this person, they don't fit in. Now, if you apply that to Irish society, stand on any street in Ireland on a Friday night and look around you and ask yourself, does this stack up? Compare that street in Dublin to a street in Madrid or Milan or Paris or London, and ask yourself, is it the case that we can isolate this problem by defining this word, using this word alcoholic, to dispose of the problem, isolate it and say this is a pathology which affects certain people but doesn't relate to society? My analysis of my situation is that in my teens, when I was young and stupid, I blundered into a sick culture, a pathological culture. And it took me 15 years to wrest myself clear of that culture, to struggle away from the grip, the lethal grip of that culture, the deadly grip of that culture, because it is a deadly disease. Alcoholism is a disease which has two destination points, madness or death. There are no other options. That's where you go if you actually get on this trail track. So what we're doing to our children is actually homicide. We're killing our children with our stupidity, with our attitudes to this problem, with our refusal. Because every time you raise this issue, you're attacked. This culture is sick in the way that it defends its right to a drug that is lethal. Because as soon as you try to raise your voice, you actually find that the voices of those who defend their own drug will drown you out and accuse you of being the problem. And that's a real problem. Now, a couple of years ago, I was down and I had to define this problem. What is the problem? We need to actually get under this to say, what is this problem? What is the nature of our pathology? It is a refusal to actually live, a refusal to understand what life is, a blockage of life. We actually have employed alcohol as a way of actually safeguarding our own inability to live, to actually secure ourselves behind this fog so that we feel safe from the joy of life. Bizarre as that sounds, that's what happens. A couple of years ago, I was down in the Electric Picnic in Stradbally, and I spent a couple of days there just walking around. There's lots of stuff going on there. It's kind of a metaphor for life, because you have poetry and literature and politics and all kinds of stuff, and music, and amazing stuff. Now, what I noticed going around these places was all the kids were going around with cans in their hands, and they were wandering in and out of stuff. Nobody was really paying attention to anything much. The only thing they were paying attention to was this stuff in the can. The events were simply a pretext to be there for the drink. And as the day went on, you saw cans, the grass of the fields covered up increasingly with cans. So you could in the end see nothing. And in the night time, the Glen Hansard and the Frames were playing, and I just stood there, heartbroken, in the middle of this crowd of beautiful young people, and saw them holding one another up. Beautiful young girls, beautiful young men, struggling to actually hold each other up. This is a sickness that is our fault. And this procrastination and this nonsense that we have to deal with, 15, 20 years going round and round and round, the same arguments, time and time and time again, when we are killing our children with our stupidity. It's time we woke up. Thank you.
My Aunt Fanny was a feisty woman, and she had a saying that stuck in my head. It was that the whole town and half the country is talking about it. Every scandal that ever happened within 5 miles, she said, the whole town and half the country is talking about it. And I used to believe her as a child, until I discovered that, as I began to grow up, that the whole town and half the country might be talking about it, but that doesn't mean anything's going to change, because the next thing came along and the whole town and half the country was talking about that. We have been talking about this for a long, long, long time. 2002 was the national strategy that Anne Hope was involved in. It never got to the cabinet table. I went in and became a member of the new strategy, travelled to Dublin for about 20 times over the last 3 years. First input to it was I asked the chairperson, are we sure that this one's going to get to the cabinet table? I was assured that definitely this one would get to the cabinet table. It hasn't got to the cabinet table 1 year after its publication. We're told this morning that we're working on it and we're not going to have any more research, but we might do something about it. I have been involved in about 4 major issues in the last 5 years, and I have lost all of them. Politics is a strange world. Just because something should be done, just because John Waters or Denis Bradley or Tom Frawley or Pat Harvey says it should be done, does not mean it will be done. There is every possibility that in 10 years' time we will be discussing this issue. And the outrage that we have is also in a context, and the context is that this country is not obsessed with addiction, and the whole country is not talking about it. We are talking about economics. The last 5 years, every program I listened to on television and on radio was about economics and the fact that you weren't getting as much money as you were 5 years ago. That's what the whole country is talking about. And Fanny would have had a ball game on a real good time over the last 5 years. But there is improvement. We're making progress. We are making progress. Des Bishop did a series of 4 programs recently on main time television, and the reviewer of television on RTE, in the Irish Times, said it was all right, it was quite good, quite attractive, but a bit boring because everybody knows that pricing, minimum pricing, availability, advertising all contribute to our drink problem. And there was me travelling to Dublin 20 times in the last 5 years to try to make that point, thought it was getting nowhere, and the reviewer of Irish Times told us that we all know it. So we are making progress. Last week, David Cameron in the Cabinet was going to introduce minimum pricing in England to actually accompany the Scottish into this massive battle in Europe and with the industry and so forth. And his Home Secretary decided that that wasn't good politics and we weren't going there. Radio 4 ran a sketch, funny sketch the other day, in which they kind of pinpointed Cameron doing a U-turn and set it up and so forth, and said, what we're doing now is a better thing. We're going to leave it to the industry. And you know where that's going to bring us. That's going to mean, and then they do a big ad which says, bring it out, that now it was discovered in a local shop that Harp was 90% horse piss. So we're making progress. We are getting there. We are talking about the issue. We're getting it into the culture, but into the culture of comedy and talk and acceptability and so forth, that we know the issues. That does not mean anything's happening. But we're only 11 years into something. When we started 25 years ago in Ireland, there was an acknowledgement that it would take when we started 11 years ago in Ireland, it would take 25 years to get to the core of this issue, to bring about real change. We're about halfway through. The difficulty is that we do not get clever enough politically, because we are fighting a political battle, not a health battle. We are in the heart of politics in this issue. And unless we either find a champion or we find enough traction at the bottom, this is not going to change quickly. And we need to know that and bring the next step forward. We have all the information, we have all the knowledge, we have all the passion, but we need to get very subtle and very clever politically. Let's hope we do it.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'm not here to offer an academic perspective, or certainly not an expert perspective, but I just wanted to give the humble view of students. And I'm conscious that there's a few of them in the room, so I'm going to ask them to hold their ears for a second. I'm going to say something that would make me probably the most unpopular president of USI that there's ever been. And that is that we're not going to like you for the changes you're going to want to make, but we will thank you for it. And I think that there is an awful lot of flack going to be coming. I have to keep it to 2 minutes now, so less of that there. There's going to be an awful lot of flack coming down the line. We've seen it from our own representative bodies, but this needs to be done. And quite certainly I am willing to put my neck on the line for it anyway, and if the guillotine may fall on me, so it must, because it's too important an issue to forget about. One of the things that I notice when I'm talking to students about it is that the armchair observer always says that this is a deeply cultural thing, and it is, and it's deeply culturally rooted. But I genuinely believe that light touch regulation has as much a part to play in this, in the systemic problem we have, as much as any cultural issue. I genuinely think that we need to get serious about right touch regulation as opposed to light touch regulation. We need to get very, very serious about minimum pricing. And we have an awful lot of backlash from students on that, and I make no secret of that. But that's something that is our own personal fault. And we'll be making damn sure over the months and years ahead that we're going to change that paradigm. And again, I think we need to get very serious about how we collate data. We have some very interesting statistics coming out of UCC at the minute under the EPUB initiative, if anybody's heard of it. We need to be able to measure how we're getting on here, because at the minute I genuinely believe for a vast majority of the time we are stabbing in the dark. And I think if we could tackle that in a meaningful statistical way, it would be very important. To address Denis's point specifically on how we're getting on politically, I would say from a student union perspective, not very well. And I would say that both as a self-criticism and, if I may be open, a criticism of us all a little bit. I believe that we're wandering generalities. I don't believe that we're being meaningfully specific in the way we target this in any way, shape or form. I would honestly say that if we are to get serious about this issue, we need to focus on one issue in the first instance. And I genuinely believe that that is minimum pricing. And I will do all that I can in order to push that agenda, and I think everybody in this room should make that a priority. I know I'm going to come up against divergent views there, but I would be, if I were to skew my opinions for the sake of keeping people happy, I wouldn't be doing my job up here. So the Union of Students in Ireland will hopefully be behind this initiative, but I would say we need to get specific. We need to be collated. We have 100 organisations doing 100 different things. If we're to get serious about this, we need to adopt a single coherent strategy, and I believe that's 2 minutes, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
When Alcohol Forum said to me they wanted something short and snappy, I thought, well, that's a bit personal, you know. As anyone who's ever heard me clashing with the head of Digi would tell you, snappy is what I do best. I'm very grateful for being given the opportunity to be here today. As you might have heard from the Minister this morning, I'm at the tail end of my involvement with Alcohol Action Ireland, and I'm actually quite sad, but I actually feel quite liberated as well, because there are some things I've been dying to get off my chest for the last 5 years, and I hope you don't mind if I go for broke here and give it a go and basically tell you exactly what I think. Well, first of all, I commend the former speakers. I agree with everything that's been said. And just to let you know, John, as you know, we brought together a coalition of 30 organisations in support of minimum pricing. We've been asking USI to support that coalition for over a year, so I'm delighted to say that you're actually thinking about it. When we started minimum pricing, I guess we started campaigning on this issue 4 years ago. People went, huh? What? And now I'm delighted to be able to say that we have one of the broadest based coalitions in support of minimum pricing out there. You know, we have everything from the ISPCC and Bernardo's to Women's Aid to Focus Ireland to the Rape Crisis Network to the Samaritans to St Patrick's University Hospital, hopefully USI getting on board soon. And it wasn't easy, and I suppose one of the things that you've asked me to speak about here this morning is effective policy making, how to support community mobilisation. And we've heard about people mobilising community mobilisation on a local level, and we've taken, I suppose, up a level and engaged in terms of community, in terms of a national community. But I think Denis has a very telling point in that, you know, we know there's 60% support for minimum pricing. We know from the Health Research Board, and we know from the research we commissioned 3 years before. So we know there's majority support for minimum pricing. 30 leading organisations have come together in a coalition to call for minimum pricing, and often these organisations, shall we say, wouldn't be in the same coalition base as each other. We know that there's broad support amongst the cabinet for minimum pricing, and yet as we stand poised again once more on the edge of the cliff to find out if we're going to have a national substance misuse strategy, you have to ask, is minimum pricing going to be included in that? And I mean, I hope it is. I think there's a case for it. I think there's broad-based support. I mean, short of us actually turning up, you know, every single person that supports it, you know, I'm not sure how much more you need to push change over. And I suppose this is what brings me on to my soapbox piece, if you'll forgive my indulgence, is I think that, with all due respect, having also sat in the steering group, what's underestimated is the sheer opposition and lobby to real change around alcohol in this country. And I'm going to name it, I'm just going to say it because I'm on my way out. So. And I used to do it anyway, even, you know, the past few years. The truth is, our government is conflicted. It makes over $2 billion a year from alcohol revenue, okay? And that's just purely based on excise and VAT. There are also jobs dependent on this. But there are a powerful lobby in Ireland that basically work not just on a national level, but on a globalised level. I've advocated on this issue in Brussels, and I've advocated at home. And I can tell you that basically the big alcohol producers, the alcohol industry, when they go to design a lobbying initiative or a public affairs initiative, they don't just think in terms of locally like Scotland or Ireland. They think globally and they act globally. And we get a downsized version here. I make no bones about it. They are opposed to significant change that will make a difference to alcohol in this country. They do not want minimum pricing. They do not want changes to alcohol marketing. They do not want an end to sports sponsorship. They do not want statutory regulation on alcohol marketing and advertising. What they want is unfettered access to young markets that will increase their profit and their bottom line. I thought you made a very good description. He said we have a bottoms-up approach, to policy making. Well, I think in relation to national policy in this country, bottom up is right, because it's been a covering your arse exercise basically for the last 15 years. I mean, normally when I do a presentation on this, I put a partridge and a pear tree up there and list out all the different working groups and strategies, and I invite people to hum it as we go through it, because the truth is we're great at generating policies, we're great at having strategies, but we don't implement them. And if you want to make a difference to community mobilisation, as the topic basically said, talking about effective policy making, then give communities effective policy to work with. I mean, you showed you basically on Facebook, the promotions that are operating. Facebook, social networking is the Wild West. The digital media is the Wild West out there. It is largely uncontrolled and uncontrollable. And unless our national governments start getting real and cooperating with other national governments to make a difference, this is just going to multiply. It's already gone viral. We already have a situation where kids are being used to market to other kids, and there is nothing more powerful than a pure testimonial. But we are not engaging with it because we don't want to, because we're adopting a blankie approach. Ironically, we're doing what kids don't do. We're putting a blankie over our heads, and we want the alcohol revenue, but we don't want to make the tough decisions that will make it different to alcohol consumption. That'll actually save lives, save families, save childhoods, save communities, and to a certain extent, perhaps even save our national identity as we go through a period of crisis. That's me soapboxing.
Normally at these events, I'm talking much earlier in the agenda about just the policy stuff, what we know, what the world tells us. Today I've been given a bit of an opportunity to soapbox, and I'm going to. I want to talk about a few things very quickly. Care, duty, leadership, astrology, and teeth. The first thing is that, as you'll see from my bio, I'm a lawyer by trade originally. Had the shark fin removed and went local. One of the things that strikes me every time I come to these events is that as a clinician or a professional, sorry, not clinician, as a professional in the health service, and as a parent, I'm bound by duties of care to children, my own children, other people's children. And what always amazes me when we come to these events and people talk about things like children and the impact of alcohol, the behaviour of vintners and others selling alcohol or passing on alcohol to young people. And I'm always struck by the fact that we know in Northern Ireland 4,000 children live with someone with an alcohol condition. We know that in the south of Ireland almost 600,000 children are affected by parental drinking. And we also know that half of our pupils in Northern Ireland drink alcohol regularly, and about 1 in 5 young people in the south of Ireland drink alcohol weekly. And yet no one ever asks, what is the duty of care on those who supply alcohol to children? And I have often wondered why duty of care stops with me as a parent and stops with me as someone who works in health, but doesn't apply to society as a whole. And I actually think that as we start to think about new ways of innovating old stories, I think the innovation is, let's stop looking to the guards to prosecute someone for selling alcohol to someone underage, because that's the legal requirement. And culturally, we know we shouldn't do it, and culturally it happens every day. Let's change the language to prosecuting people for breaching a duty of care to children. And I think that will start to put an emotive argument in place of a sensationalist argument. And I think it's something that we as a society need to seriously think about. The second issue is leadership. And as we've seen from the Minister this morning, government to me is a bit like a bride that's turning up at the chapel and the groom still isn't there and they're waving them round again. Because every few years, government comes to its own Rubicon about what can it do about alcohol and alcohol culture, and discovers that the groom maybe isn't there yet and they're waved around by someone say, come round again in a couple of minutes. In reality, what I've found, and from our own work in Derry and Strabane, is that one of the areas that we don't do enough is the leadership from the ground up to inform the leadership at the top as to what needs to happen. Both the Alcohol Forum here and my own work in the North has seen the whole concept of civic leadership as a way in which we use local government to be the motivator that brings the groom to the altar, so that the next time the bride comes around, that it finds public will standing at the front of the church saying, let's go now, Minister. Now is the time for us as a society to do something about alcohol. Now, in terms of astrology, I don't believe in astrology. But I was very taken by the whole Mayan calendar thing before Christmas, and I had a daughter who was convinced the world was ending that night. And what the Mayan calendar talked about was alignment of the planets. And the planets truly only align every 200 years. The last time we had 6 planets in alignment was 2010. The next time we'll have 4 planets in alignment is 2040. So this doesn't happen that often. But as someone who's been in the alcohol debate for quite a time, we actually have a number of planets in alignment, metaphorically speaking. In Northern Ireland we have the National Strategic Direction on Drugs and Alcohol. In the south of Ireland we have the National Substance Use Strategy, both of which are now operating on the similar and conjunctive time frame. In the Republic of Ireland we have an imminent public health report, Your Health is Your Wealth. In Northern Ireland we have a timely fit and well strategy running in the same time frame. We are aligning our drink driving legislation, and just this time last year, or just a wee bit longer than this time last year, the two governments agreed that as a country we needed to work politically and operationally together to change the way in which alcohol culture moves forward. So in my view, the planets are aligned, but the reality is time is sliding by again. We can't wait to 2040 for 3 more planets to line up. Anybody who's been in this field before has seen these planets aligned before. I think today is another indicator of the time that we can't wait any longer, and every speaker keeps reiterating that. Because we're currently in a climate where we're managing and doing things right, but in truth what we need is leadership that's doing the right thing. And the final comment about teeth is just about something my children have been saying to me on different occasions that kind of makes me think sometimes about my own perceptions on alcohol. My daughter looks at the internet constantly and loves little phrases, and when she finds one she likes, she puts it on her bedroom door and changes every other day. And she had one on her door the other week that said, I'm annoyed by the taste of my own teeth. And I kind of thought, what does that mean? But in truth, I think where we're at with alcohol as a culture and as a country is that, like our teeth, it's something we carry with us all the time. If we're fortunate, we hold on to it for quite a long time. All it needs is a simple solution to change the way in which we taste our teeth. And I think we just haven't found the right way of doing that. And the final thing is something my son said just innocently the other day, and I don't think he even recognises the significance of what he said. He had lost something and he found it, and I said to him, where did you find it? And he said, in the last place I looked. I think what we've got in Ireland is we are still looking for somewhere. And in truth, what we've heard today and what we know from all the evidence is we've been looking in the last place for a very long time. All we have to do is lift it out, wave it above our heads and say, we found it. Thank you.